All right, today we're going to tackle a really big topic, one that's absolutely essential for anyone working with the U.S. Department of Defense. We're talking about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC Level 2. You can think of it as the digital shield for our national security, and we're about to break down exactly how it's built. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the mandate itself, what it is and why it matters. Then we'll figure out exactly who needs to comply and lay out a framework for getting it done. From there, we'll get into a step-by-step plan and wrap up with how to get ready for that all-important audit. Okay, let's dive right in. To kick things off, what exactly is this CMMC Level 2 mandate all about? And more importantly, why does it even exist? At its heart, CMMC Level 2 is a mandatory cybersecurity standard. They call it advanced hygiene, which is a pretty good way to put it. Basically, if your company handles sensitive but not classified information for the DoD, this isn't optional. It's the absolute baseline you have to meet to keep that data safe. And believe me, this is not just some simple checklist you can breeze through. No, we are talking about 110. That's right, 110 specific security controls that come straight from this standards. These are detailed rules for everything from who can access your data to how you handle a potential breach. That number, 110, really tells you how serious this is. Now, I just threw out a term, Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. So what in the world is that? Well, it's government data that's sensitive enough that it needs serious protection, even though it's not officially classified. We're talking about the real nuts and bolts of defense projects, things like technical drawings, key project specs, or even personnel data. And here is the real kicker, the thing that makes this so urgent. There's a hard deadline. By 2025, having this certification will be a requirement for all Department of Defense contracts. The clock is definitely ticking. Okay, so we've got this big mandate on the horizon. The obvious next question is, who does this actually apply to? Is this you? Let's find out. The net here is actually way wider than you might think. Of course, the prime contractors who work directly with the DoD are on the list, but it also flows all the way down the supply chain. We're talking subcontractors who get CUI from those primes, IT service providers who support these companies, and even manufacturers who are building defense-related parts. So let's get practical. How do you know if your business needs to worry about this? Well, here are a few dead giveaways. If you're sharing technical drawings or specs, if you see the DFARS 7012 clause in your contracts, that's a big one. Or if you're handling any kind of personnel security information, that's a huge sign you need to be on the path to Level 2 compliance. All right, we've covered the what, the why, and the who. Now for the really important part, how do you actually do this? How do you get compliant? Let's look at the strategy, which I like to call the 3 pillars of success. It all comes down to these 3 key things. First up is the control assessment. You have to do a deep, honest evaluation of all 110 controls to see where you stand. Second is advanced documentation. This means creating critical documents like your system security plan and a plan of action for any gaps. And third, and this is huge, is evidence management. You can't just say you're secure. You have to prove it with rock-solid audit trails. Okay, with that strategy in mind, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's walk through the actual step-by-step plan for making this happen. You can really think of this as a 3-phase journey. It all starts with scoping. This is where you figure out exactly where that sensitive CUI data is living in your systems. You got to map it all out. Next is the assessment. That's the deep dive into those 110 controls to find your weak spots. And finally, you have remediation. This is usually the longest part, where you roll up your sleeves and actually fix those gaps. So what does that remediation phase actually look like on the ground? Well, it means implementing real, tangible security measures. Things like setting up multi-factor authentication for your users are a must. And another big one is encrypting all of your CUI, not just when it's moving across the network, but also when it's just sitting on a server. You have to protect it everywhere. So, you've put in the hard work, you've closed up those security gaps, awesome. But now comes the big test, the audit. So what does being truly audit-ready even look like? Yeah, when the auditors show up, saying you're secure isn't enough. You have to prove it. That means your paperwork has to be perfect. You need a complete system security plan that even diagrams how CUI flows through your company. You need a clear plan of action for any leftover items, and critically, You need what's called an evidence binder that proves you've met every single one of those 110 controls. And just look at this timeline. It makes it crystal clear that this is a marathon, not a sprint. You can't cram for this test. You should be doing a mock assessment at least 6 months out. By the 3-month mark, you should have all your evidence gathered. And that last month is for a final, intense readiness review to make sure you're totally prepared. Okay, so after hearing all that, you might be wondering, what's the one thing that trips people up the most? Where do companies struggle? What is the biggest challenge here? Well, it turns out the answer is pretty specific. It's Control 313.11, which is all about encrypting CUI when it's at rest. When it's just sitting there on a server, a laptop, or a hard drive. This is by far the most commonly failed control. It's technically challenging and requires making sure data is unreadable even if a device gets stolen. And get this, you can't just promise you'll fix everything later. To even get an auditor in the door, you have to hit a pretty high bar. Just look at this chart. You need to have at least 80% of the controls fully implemented. You're only allowed to have a small number of less critical items on your to-do list. The standard for being ready is no joke. If you want to boil it all down to one simple idea, this quote absolutely nails it. CMMC Level 2 is like the digital building code for our national defense industry. It's not just another regulation, it's a foundational safety standard that's just not negotiable. And that really leaves us with a big final question to think about. As government and private companies work closer and closer together, who's really on the hook for our collective digital defense? CMMC suggests the answer is everyone. It's a shared responsibility, built one secure contractor at a time. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.